Renting used to be a simple option for those who can't afford to buy a home, but now even putting someone else's roof over your head is a struggle. Would you believe only a handful of suburbs in Australia are now affordable on a minimum wage?
You've got no hope against full-time wage earners. It's very cutthroat. It's hard.
It's a nightmare, absolute nightmare.
I was at breaking point.
I reckon over the last 10 years, it's skyrocketed.
Me and my partner are young, we haven't got a rental history.
Minimum wage and maximum pain. Rental affordability in Australia is at crisis point, and for thousands of families, even homes in the outer suburbs of our capital cities are now out of reach.
And yet for so many people, they're being priced out of a basic need.
The latest census results paint a pretty grim picture of our rental market. Almost 12% of Aussies are in serious rental stress. And as you're about to see, there are just 4 suburbs across our capital cities where those on the minimum wage can afford to rent.
Even if I took a 1-bedroom on, I'd still be looking at $300 to $320, $350, and, you know, they're few and far between too, so it's hard.
Kerry Anderson has a roof over her head, just.
My rent will be due again on the 17th, and I'll be $400 in arrears. This is the toughest it's ever been for me in 20 years.
The 54-year-old is one of thousands of Australians under extreme rental stress. She was forced to move in with her grown-up daughter in a small 2-bedroom home an hour east of Melbourne earlier this year. The pair simply couldn't afford to rent and live by themselves.
I brought my kids up for 22 years on my own. I'm used to shuffling bills and managing things. And it's tough, and like you only have to get registration or high bills or something medical comes up and then you're scratching again.
People in rental stress are those who spend more than 30% of their income on their rent. For example, if you're earning $1,000 a week, you shouldn't be spending more than $300 a week on your rent.
And you see that in places like Edmondson Park in Sydney, which would be generally considered a relatively affordable place to rent, but actually people are paying upwards of 40% of their after-tax income to rent there.
Andrew Reichtman is from realestate.com. According to the website, it's almost impossible for those on the minimum wage or any type of income support to rent in our major cities.
So for a minimum wage earner of $18.29 an hour, that equates to roughly $190 per week on rent. If you're spending more than $190, you're in rental stress. If you're spending less than $190, then it's actually affordable in our view.
Young families are overrepresented when it comes to rental stress, and the pressure can leave people vulnerable.
She turned off her phone, didn't contact us till the next day, and told us all these stories and stopped contact completely.
These young mothers were each scammed online by a woman claiming to be a landlord. They paid a bond and a month's rent in full because they were sick of getting knocked back by real estate agents.
We don't have enough deposit to be able to put it on a house at the moment. So the prices of rental are just absolutely ridiculous, especially with what area it is as well. It makes it even harder because, you know, you're trying to find something in a budget with so many bedrooms.
Real estate's more go for someone who's older, who's got more work experience, who's been in a job longer, rather than they look at young people and think we're going to destroy the house or we're not going to be able to pay rent on time. So it's very difficult.
For one person in Melbourne, the median weekly rental for a unit in Melton is $270, meaning low-income earners are paying 43% of their wage on rent. In Bacchus Marsh, where weekly rent is $280, people are paying 45% of their wage, while in Frankston, families are paying a huge 46% of their salary on rent. In Sydney's Edmondson Park, where weekly rent for a unit is $288, people are paying 46% of their salary on rent. Those in Mount Pritchard are forking out about 45%. And in Villawood, where rent is just under $300, the level of rental stress is at 47%.
If you're paying more than 40% of your income on rent, it really doesn't leave a lot left over for your day-to-day living expenses, but perhaps more importantly, it doesn't give you an opportunity to save up for a long-term investment in housing.
In Park Ridge in Logan, where rent is $240, low-income earners are paying 38% of their wage on rent. Those in Ipswich are forking out 39% of their salary, while in Booval, the level of rental stress is around 40%. Coralbin in Brisbane, Elizabeth North in Adelaide and Rokeby and Berrydale in Hobart are the only suburbs in capital cities that are still affordable.
Why is it important for those on the minimum wage to live in inner city?
Well, there are people that need access to services such as ours, and they, in some cases, need access to public hospitals, and they often are around cities and inner cities.
Major Brendan Nottle is from the Salvation Army. He says sadly, those under rental stress are increasingly finding themselves on the streets.
Often we assume that there's one particular stereotype of people that are homeless or potentially at risk of homelessness. Homelessness can affect anyone at any time, especially those that cannot afford housing.
Experts say the solution is supply.
It's an absolute vicious cycle that's going on here. When the government hits property investors, they raise rents. When they raise rents, families can no longer afford to rent.
Property guru Margaret Lomas says many Aussies are still willing to invest in housing, and more should be done to help them keep rent low.
Property investors are going to become fewer in the market, and that will mean that there'll be fewer properties available for rent.
To find out the affordability of suburbs near you, just head to our website.